My mother-in-law's savage revenge on her cheating son, starving him out while I thrived. He lied, got caught, and she's making sure he either cooks for himself or lives off fast food, sweet petty karma served cold. I never thought my life would turn into one of those chaotic Reddit stories you hear about, but here we are. Everything started unraveling around September last year. My husband and I had been together for 15 years, and for most of that time, I thought we had a solid relationship. Sure, he had his quirks. He was picky about food, obsessed with his stupid gaming setup, and generally useless around the house. But I thought we were doing okay. Turns out I was wrong, really wrong. Around this time last year, his parents were dealing with some major issues of their own. My father-in-law had been diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a serious lung disease that was basically a death sentence. The doctors said he had anywhere from 2 to 5 years left. On top of that, their house was being foreclosed on. I never really got the full story on why. Something about financial troubles that had been building for years. It didn't matter to me. When they asked if they could move in, there wasn't even a question. Of course they could. I'll be honest, my in-laws have always treated me better than my own family ever did. My mom and dad were cold, distant, and frankly, kind of mean. My MIL and Phil, on the other hand, had always made me feel welcome, and I loved them like my own parents. So when they asked to move in, I didn't hesitate. We planned for them to move in just before Thanksgiving. It seemed like the timing would work out. We'd all be together for the holidays, and it would give us some time to prepare for the change. But then September hit, and that's when everything went to hell. I found out my husband was cheating on me. I don't even know how long it had been going on, months, maybe even a year. Apparently, he was seeing some woman he met through work. The part that really got me, this wasn't some serious relationship where they were planning to run off together. No, this was just cheap and gross. He'd sneak off for a few hours, spend money we didn't have, and then come home acting like nothing happened. I confronted him, and to no one's surprise, he denied everything. Then, when he realized I had proof, text messages, sketchy credit card charges, and some pictures a friend had sent me, he switched gears. Suddenly, he was confused and going through a hard time. He tried to spin it like it was some sort of emotional crisis, but I wasn't buying it. I told him I wanted a divorce. Now here's where things got messy. Even though I was done with him, I still told my MIL and Phil they could move in. Why? Because I wasn't about to punish them for their son's bullshit. They were good people, and my MIL especially had always been in my corner. When I told her about the cheating, she wasn't just upset, she was furious. Not just because he had betrayed me, but because he had put our daughter in the middle of all this. Our daughter is autistic, and sudden changes can really throw her off. Big emotional outbursts, changes in her routine, or sudden household shifts can overwhelm her completely. So as much as I hated the idea of my husband still living in the house, I knew forcing him out right away wasn't an option. The transition had to be slow or my daughter would struggle, and that wasn't something I was willing to risk. To make matters worse, the idiot refused to leave. His name was still on the deed, and he clung to that like it was his golden ticket. He kept saying he had nowhere else to go, which shockingly was true. Even his mistress didn't want him moving in with her. Imagine being so pathetic that your side chick doesn't even want you full-time. That's when my MIL started her quiet little war. It started with something small, a random Tuesday when my husband asked her for $20. He told her he needed gas money. Now my MIL doesn't just hand out cash, but since she knew we only had one car, she assumed it was to make sure he could get to work. She gave him the money, no questions asked, except he didn't put gas in the car. The next day, while my MIL and I were chatting in the kitchen, I mentioned the car was almost out of gas. That's when we pieced it together. Instead of filling the tank, he had used the money to go out with his mistress. I don't know what pissed my MIL off more, the line or the fact that he wasted her money to go cheat. From that moment on, she was done playing nice. The first thing she did was stop cooking for him. My husband is one of the pickiest eaters on the planet. We're talking about a grown man who refuses to eat anything with onions, peppers, or even mildly spicy food. For 15 years, I'd bent over backward to make meals he'd actually eat. Not anymore. My MIL and I started making dishes we knew he'd hate. I'm talking spicy tacos, pasta with rich tomato sauce, and soups loaded with veggies. Every night, he'd either sit there sulking or storm off to grab fast food. At first, I felt bad. I mean, it's petty, right? But honestly, after everything he'd put me through, I couldn't help but enjoy it. Watching him come home, sniff the air, and realize he was stuck eating food he despised became a weirdly satisfying routine. But that was just the start. My MIL had something bigger planned, and when it happened, even I couldn't believe how far she went. After my MIL realized her son had lied to her about the gas money, she decided she was done playing nice. Cutting him off from dinner was just the start. That was her warm-up. What came next turned the whole house upside down, and honestly, I don't even know how she managed to keep a straight face through it all. It started small. My husband was obsessed with his routines. Shower in the morning at exactly 6:30, coffee in the same chipped mug, and breakfast at the same corner of the kitchen table while scrolling on his phone. He was predictable, almost robotic. My MIL knew this, so she started changing things up in ways that seemed innocent at first. She moved the coffee machine. Not a huge deal for most people, but for him? He spent an entire morning pacing around the kitchen, opening cabinets like the machine had just evaporated. He ended up slamming the front door on his way to work without his morning coffee. The next day, she swapped his favorite mug for one that had a giant cartoon cat on it, the kind that screamed "garage sale reject." He refused to use it and left without coffee again. She started doing weird things to his laundry too. He's always been picky about clothes. Everything had to be folded just right, his shirts hung in a specific order, and his socks paired a certain way. My MIL? She started folding his shirts inside out, mismatching his socks, and hanging his pants in random spots. She even started sneaking one or two of his favorite t-shirts into my pile so they'd smell like my detergent, something he hated. For weeks, he'd stomp around the house complaining that his clothes felt weird. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was the toothbrush incident. My MIL knew my husband was obsessed with his toothbrush. He had one of those fancy electric ones that buzzes after 30 seconds, so you know when to switch sides. He was convinced it was the only thing keeping his teeth perfect. So one day my MIL swapped the brush head with a worn-out one from the back of the cabinet. The bristles were frayed, bent in weird directions, practically useless. He never noticed. For weeks, he kept raving about how his toothbrush wasn't working right and that he might need to see a dentist. By this point, my MIL and I were quietly enjoying the chaos. But then things took a bigger turn. One afternoon, my MIL overheard my husband talking to someone on the phone. She didn't hear the whole conversation, but it was enough to piece things together. He was still sneaking around with his mistress. And worse, he was trying to borrow money from her. Not just a little money either. He was asking her for rent money because, according to him, I was draining him dry with the divorce. He painted himself as some helpless victim, struggling to survive while I was supposedly living like a queen. That's when my MIL decided to hit him where it hurt. My Phil's health had been getting worse. He was spending more time on oxygen, and simple tasks like walking across the room were leaving him winded. My MIL knew it was only a matter of time before things took a turn. So she called a family meeting, just me, her, and my Phil. She told me she had a plan, but I didn't realize how brutal it was until it was already in motion. She started moving some of my husband's stuff out of our bedroom. Not big things, just little bits at first. His cologne, his razor, his shoes, things he'd leave out regularly. Instead of putting them back, she started piling them up in the garage. He didn't notice at first. Then she moved on to bigger things. His gaming headset, his laptop charger, his stack of unread mail. Each item ended up in the garage, tucked into random corners. One evening, my MIL casually mentioned that maybe it was time my husband got his own space. She suggested he stay in the garage, said it would give him more privacy. She even threw in a fake compliment saying it was the perfect man cave. She said it so casually that he actually agreed. He moved his gaming setup and his TV out there, thinking he was gaining some kind of freedom. What he didn't realize was that my MIL had basically evicted him without him even noticing. The garage had no heat, no proper insulation, and a spider problem so bad you could hear webs snapping if you walked through it. The man spent 2 weeks out there before he realized he'd been tricked. He tried to move back into the house, but by then, my MIL had filled his old closet with my files, medical equipment, and supplies. The bedroom? Rearranged completely. His stuff? Scattered across the garage like an abandoned thrift store. He lost his mind, stormed around yelling that we'd crossed a line. My MIL didn't even flinch. She told him if he wanted to be part of the family again, he needed to start acting like one. Otherwise, the garage was plenty good enough for a liar and a cheat. The man sulked for weeks. He started spending more and more time out of the house, which, honestly, was a win for everyone. At one point, he tried to take our daughter out for the day to win her over. My MIL shut that down fast. She didn't yell or argue. She just told him no and reminded him he wasn't exactly known for making smart decisions lately. Eventually, my husband tried one last desperate move. He called his mistress from the garage, begging her to let him stay with her. He promised he'd be out of her way and just needed a place to crash. She turned him down flat. That's how I found him one morning, half asleep in the garage, sitting on a pile of his own laundry, looking like he hadn't showered in days. My MIL didn't say a word when she walked past him that morning, just grabbed her purse, told me she was headed to the store, and muttered something about picking up extra food, something my husband definitely wouldn't like. By the time my husband was basically living in the garage, things felt weirdly calm in the house. My MIL had her own quiet rhythm of payback going, and honestly, it was working. He was miserable, and for once, I didn't have to be the one dealing with his nonsense. But as much as he was suffering, he hadn't hit rock bottom yet, and my meal wasn't finished with him. One morning, I woke up to my meal standing at the dining room table with a pile of papers spread out in front of her. At first, I thought it was something to do with my Phil's medical bills, but when I glanced closer, I realized it was bank statements. My husband's bank statements. Turns out my MIL had been quietly collecting them every time the mail arrived. Since he barely checked his mail anymore, probably because most of it was overdue bills and credit card nonsense, she'd been stashing it away. She'd spent weeks digging through them, and what she found was insane. He'd been draining our joint account on stupid stuff. Uber rides, hotel charges, bar tabs, and even one of those sketchy meal plan subscriptions that he probably forgot to cancel. It explained why our grocery budget always seemed tighter than it should have. That wasn't even the worst part. My MIL found out he had taken out a payday loan. He borrowed $1,500 at some absurdly high interest rate and hadn't made a single payment on it. The loan company had already sent a few nasty letters warning about legal action. He hadn't told anyone, just ignored it and kept spending. My MIL didn't yell or lose her mind when she showed me everything. She was calm, too calm. I should have known that meant she had a plan. The next day, I noticed her in the garage rummaging through some old boxes. By dinner, she had dug out this ancient, ugly ceramic rooster that used to sit on her kitchen counter years ago. This thing was massive, bright orange with chipped paint, and she plopped it right in the middle of the dining room table. I had no idea what the point was until later that night when I caught her stuffing money into it. Over the next week, she started collecting rent from my husband. Every time he asked for something, whether it was money for gas, groceries, or whatever, she'd tell him to put the money into the rooster. She claimed she was saving it for him, but I knew better. She never let him take a dime out. Every time he handed her cash, she shoved it into that ceramic bird like she was feeding a slot machine. It didn't take long for him to figure out what was going on. He tried complaining, saying she had no right to control his money. She reminded him that he was still living in her house, or technically in her garage, and that if he didn't like it, he was free to leave. He didn't have much choice, so he grumbled and paid up. A few weeks later, my MIL took things to the next level. My Phil's condition had been getting worse, and my MIL decided to hire a nurse to help out a few days a week. The nurse was this sweet older lady who took her job seriously, and she wasn't about to tolerate my husband's crap. She parked in his driveway spot, walked through his side of the garage to get to the house, and didn't move a muscle when he tried to intimidate her. He complained to my MIL saying the nurse was invading his space. My MIL just smiled and told him if he wanted more space, he could find it somewhere else. My husband started spiraling after that. His hours at work had been cut, and without his regular paycheck, he was completely broke. One day, I caught him sneaking groceries out of our fridge, stuff he clearly planned to take to the garage. My MIL walked in right as he was stuffing a pack of chicken breasts under his arm. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten him. Instead, she grabbed the keys to the car and drove straight to the grocery store, with him trailing behind her like an idiot. She walked him straight to customer service, handed him a basket, and told him he was buying his own food from now on. It didn't take long for word to spread about my husband's mess. His brother, who had always been pretty distant, showed up one afternoon to talk some sense into him. That turned into a disaster. His brother didn't just confront him, he tore into him right there in the garage. I overheard bits of it through the window, something about embarrassing the family, treating me like garbage, and how their parents didn't raise him to be like this. My husband tried defending himself, claiming I was turning everyone against him, but his brother wasn't having it. He stormed out, and I didn't see him again for weeks. By this point, my MIL had turned my husband's life into a full-time disaster. She didn't just cut him off financially, she started sabotaging everything he did. She called the loan company pretending to be him and updated his contact info, giving them his personal cell number and telling them he was eager to discuss repayment. They started blowing up his phone day and night. Then she started answering his calls when his mistress rang. She'd pick up, all polite and sweet, and tell her that he was busy doing chores in the garage. Sometimes she'd add that he was taking a break from dating or focused on family time. The mistress eventually stopped calling altogether. The breaking point came when my MIL pulled one final move that I still laugh about to this day. My husband had been sneaking out of the garage late at night, probably trying to see his mistress or just escape for a few hours. My MIL had noticed the pattern, so one afternoon she dragged an old wooden dresser out to the garage and wedged it in front of the side door. The next morning, my husband nearly broke the door trying to shove it open, only to find a handwritten note taped to it. "Your exit's blocked. Maybe try fixing your life instead of running from it." My husband lost his mind that morning, screaming that we were ruining his life. My MIL calmly reminded him that he'd already done that himself. He barely left the garage after that. The man sulked for weeks, too embarrassed to show his face around the house. The best part? My MIL took that ceramic rooster, the one stuffed full of his money, and spent it all on herself. She bought new clothes, took herself out for dinner a few times, and even paid to have her hair done. When my husband finally asked for the savings, she told him the rooster had run dry. By the time my husband had been exiled to the garage, things felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was more like that weird silence before a storm. My MIL wasn't done yet, and what she did next turned everything upside down. My husband's life was a mess by this point. His mistress had cut him off, his brother wouldn't speak to him, and whatever pride he had left was sitting in that freezing, cluttered garage. He'd stopped asking for help, probably because he knew my MIL would make it miserable for him. Instead, he spent most of his time sulking in the garage, ordering fast food, and mindlessly scrolling on his phone. Then one afternoon, my MIL came inside with a grin I knew meant trouble. She had spent the morning on the phone with one of her friends from church, a woman who somehow seemed to know everyone's business. Apparently, my husband's affair wasn't exactly a secret anymore. The mistress had been complaining to her friends about how my husband was lazy, broke, and clingy. The best part? The mistress had started dating someone else, a guy who owned his own auto shop, and she told my husband to stay away. My MIL had no intention of letting this information go to waste. She called a handful of relatives and spread the story like wildfire. Within days, family members were blowing up my husband's phone, not to support him but to chew him out. His aunt called him a pathetic loser. His uncle told him he was an embarrassment to the family, and one of his cousins flat out told him he deserved everything that was happening. My husband tried blaming me, claiming I was the one turning people against him, but no one believed him. My MIL had made sure people knew the truth, and they weren't holding back. But the real chaos started when my MIL found out my husband had been sneaking into the house during the day when no one was home. I came home one evening and found a half-eaten sandwich on the counter, along with one of my husband's shirts tossed over a chair. My MIL was furious when I told her. She didn't say much, but the next morning she marched out to the garage with a toolbox in hand. She went after the garage door first. The automatic opener? Gone. The cord he used to yank it open manually? Snipped. By the time she was done, the only way in or out was through the side door, the one she'd already wedged shut with that dresser. That night, my husband had to bang on the back door like a desperate salesman just to get inside. My MIL let him in, eventually, but not before reminding him that the garage was his space now, and that he was no longer welcome to roam the house like he owned the place. Things could have ended there, but my MIL wanted to make sure he really understood his place. She went into his garage room one morning while he was gone and packed up whatever junk he had left inside. His clothes, his toiletries, even his stack of gaming magazines, all of it got tossed into boxes. Then she dragged those boxes out to the curb and stuck a handwritten sign on top that said, "Free to a good home." The man came home that evening and found half his stuff gone. Some of it had already been taken. A neighbor walked off with his old DVD collection, and someone grabbed his toolbox. He went ballistic, but my MIL just reminded him that if he'd been smart enough to pay his bills and act like a decent person, he wouldn't be living in a garage in the first place. The final blow came when my MIL decided to deal with his payday loan. Since he refused to handle it himself, she called the loan company directly. She calmly explained that he no longer had access to any household funds and that he was now living in a garage like a stray cat. She told them they were welcome to come visit him if they wanted to discuss payments in person. A week later, some guy from the loan company showed up. He banged on the garage door for nearly 10 minutes while my husband hid inside, refusing to answer. The guy eventually gave up, but not before shouting that they'd be back soon and things were only going to get worse. My MIL watched the whole thing from the kitchen window with a smile on her face. After that, my husband barely showed his face. He'd sneak out before sunrise, probably to avoid more loan sharks, and wouldn't come back until late at night. My MIL took advantage of that too. She changed the Wi-Fi password, canceled his cell phone plan since it was still in her name, and even started locking the fridge at night. Not because she was worried about food, but because she knew it would drive him crazy. The last straw was when my MIL decided to have the garage sprayed for bugs. My husband had been complaining about spiders for weeks, so my MIL called an exterminator. Except instead of warning my husband, she scheduled the spray for a day she knew he'd be home. He spent hours locked in the garage while the place reeked of chemicals. The man finally snapped after that. He packed a duffel bag, stormed inside, and announced that he was leaving for good. My MIL didn't stop him. She just handed him an old grocery bag with a few loose toiletries inside and told him good luck. A few weeks later, my MIL got a call from his boss. Turns out my husband had been fired after showing up late too many times. The man had no job, no money, and no place to stay. His brother eventually let him crash on his couch for a few days, but that didn't last long. After that, no one knew where he went. My MIL didn't lose a second of sleep over it. She spent the next few weeks making the house feel normal again, cooking real meals, helping my Phil get comfortable with his care routine, and turning my husband's old bedroom into a cozy guest room for visiting family. I can't say I felt bad for my husband. The man torched his own life and thought he could crawl his way back without consequences. My MIL made sure he learned otherwise, and honestly, I couldn't have planned it better myself. After my husband stormed out with his duffel bag, things settled down at home. My MIL finally had some peace. My Field's health was stable, and our daughter was doing better now that the house wasn't constantly full of tension. It felt like we could finally breathe. But my husband wasn't done being a disaster. A few weeks after he left, I started hearing whispers about him from people around town. He hadn't gone far, just a few miles away, and word spread fast that he wasn't exactly thriving. Apparently, he had tried crashing at a friend's place, but that didn't last long. The guy kicked him out after my husband started asking for money and stealing beers from the fridge. After that, he bounced between cheap motels and his car. Then came the phone calls. At first, he tried to get in touch with me, leaving long-winded voicemails acting like he was ready to make things right. He'd ramble on about how he was changing and working on himself, but it was obvious he just wanted back in the house. I ignored every message. When I wouldn't answer, he started calling my ML instead. He tried guilt-tripping her, going on about how he was her son and that family doesn't abandon each other. She didn't fall for it. After the third call, she blocked his number and told me to do the same. That's when he started showing up unannounced. One afternoon, I was pulling into the driveway when I saw him standing near the garage, digging through some of the boxes my MIL had left out for charity pickup. He looked rough, hair greasy, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from days before. When he saw me, he shuffled over and tried to act casual, asking if I could spot him a few bucks. I told him no and went inside. He stood on the porch for over an hour before my MIL came home. When she saw him out there, she grabbed a broom from the closet and marched outside like she was about to chase off a raccoon. He left after that, cussing under his breath like he was the victim in all this. That was bad enough, but things got worse when I found out he'd been visiting my Phil behind our backs. My Phil's health had been declining, and he was spending most of his time resting. Somehow, my husband figured out that my Phil was usually home alone during the day when my male was out running errands. He started stopping by, pretending he was checking in when really, he was just there to beg for cash. My Phil, being the kind-hearted man he was, gave him a little money the first couple of times, probably just to get him to leave. But my MIL caught wind of it when she found a crumpled receipt from a liquor store in my files room. She knew right away what had happened. That night, my MIL took my file's debit card and left it with me for safekeeping. She didn't tell my husband, she just waited. Sure enough, 2 days later, my husband showed up again. My Phil told him there was no cash in the house and the debit card was missing. My husband tried playing dumb at first, pretending he was just there to visit. Then he got angry, stomping around muttering that this family's out to get him. He didn't know my MIL was on her way home. When my MIL pulled into the driveway and saw his car parked out front, she knew exactly what was happening. She walked inside, didn't say a word to him, and went straight to the laundry room. Moments later, she came back out with the same broom she'd used before, except this time she didn't just threaten him with it. I stood at the window and watched her march outside with that broom held like a sword. My husband barely had time to react before she started swinging it at him, not to hurt him, but to herd him off the property like some stray dog. He stumbled down the steps, tripped over his own feet, and ended up scrambling across the lawn like a lunatic, while my MIL stood on the porch waving the broom over her head. The man finally got the message. He didn't show up at the house again after that. But just when we thought things were over, my MIL got a call from the police. Apparently, my husband had been arrested. He'd been caught trying to shoplift a cart full of random junk from Walmart, cleaning supplies, snacks, and some cheap sunglasses. When security stopped him, he claimed he was just trying to provide for his family. The officers weren't buying it. The cop on the phone asked if anyone in the family was willing to post bail. My MIL didn't even hesitate. She told them to let him figure it out himself. Weeks passed, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. But one evening, I came home from work and found a cardboard box sitting on the porch. No note, no explanation, just a box. Inside was a pile of random junk that clearly belonged to my husband. Old shoes, half a bottle of cologne, and a bunch of loose change. I figured one of his friends had dumped it there after finally getting sick of him. A few days later, my MIL found out he'd been staying at a rundown trailer park outside of town. Apparently, some guy he knew from high school had let him crash there after he got out of jail. He spent his days drinking, begging for cash, and trying to guilt-trip people into feeling sorry for him. That's when my MIL decided to finish things for good. She tracked down the landlord of that trailer park and explained everything. The cheating, the stealing, the fact that my husband couldn't hold a job if his life depended on it. She warned him that my husband was known for manipulating people and that he'd likely try to weasel his way into staying rent-free. The landlord must have believed her because the next day, my husband was kicked out. The last time I saw him was months later, outside a gas station. He was standing near the entrance, smoking a cigarette and looking like he hadn't bathed in days. He spotted me and started walking over like he was going to say something, but before he could get close, a guy inside the store started yelling at him to leave. Apparently, my husband had been hanging around there too much, bothering customers. I didn't wait to see how it ended. I got back in my car, drove home, and never heard from him again. My Mills quiet war had turned into a complete takedown, and honestly, he brought every bit of it on himself. After my husband vanished from our lives, things finally started feeling normal again. My Mill was back to her usual self. No more stomping around with brooms, no more mind games, no more chaos. She focused on caring for my Phil, and I focused on my daughter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better. Months passed without a word from my husband. No calls, no random appearances, nothing. I figured he was either couch surfing or had finally found some sorry soul willing to put up with him. I stopped thinking about him altogether. But then one morning I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I would have ignored it, but something told me to pick up. It was my husband's old boss, the one who fired him. Apparently, my husband had been crashing in some rundown rental house that belonged to one of the guys from his old job. The guy let him stay for a while out of pity, but my husband never paid rent, left trash everywhere, and had been caught sneaking bottles of booze into the place. The landlord finally had enough and threw him out. The boss warned me my husband was trying to reconnect with family, not because he wanted to make things right, but because he was desperate. Sure enough, a week later, my MIL got a knock at the door. It was him. He looked terrible, face sunburned, hair all uneven like he'd hacked at it with kitchen scissors, and his clothes were wrinkled and dirty. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder and asked if he could just come in for a minute. My MIL didn't say a word. She stood there blocking the door with one arm on the frame like she was daring him to try and push past her. After a few seconds, she told him to leave. He didn't move. He started talking fast, rambling about how he'd made mistakes and just needed a chance. He claimed he had a job lined up, said he was trying to turn things around, and swore he wasn't drinking anymore. My MIL wasn't buying it. She told him if he didn't leave, she was calling the police. He finally stepped back, but before walking off, he blurted out that he was still entitled to his share of the house. That's when I realized why he was really there. He wanted money. He didn't know my MIL had been preparing for this. She had been quietly working with a lawyer since the day he left. The divorce papers had been finalized weeks earlier, and my MIL had managed to push through a legal agreement that would force him to sign over his share of the house in exchange for waiving any spousal support. It was airtight. He had no claim to anything. The next day, she had the paperwork printed and ready. When my husband showed up again, she didn't argue. She didn't give him a speech or demand an apology. She just handed him a pen, pointed to the spot where he had to sign, and waited. He looked like he was about to argue, but my MIL cut him off. She calmly told him that if he didn't sign, she would tell every person he knew, from his old coworkers to whatever friends he had left, exactly how pathetic his life had become. She said she'd call the loan company, the landlord who kicked him out, even the mistress who dumped him, and make sure they all knew that he was still out here begging for scraps. He signed without another word. That should have been the end of it, but my MIL wasn't quite done. After he signed, she told him that since he didn't own anything anymore, he had exactly 1 hour to come back and grab whatever junk he still had in the garage. Whatever he didn't take would be hauled off to the dump the next morning. He showed up about 30 minutes later with a half-empty duffel bag. He stuffed in whatever clothes he could, grabbed his old gaming console, which I doubt even worked anymore, and took off without saying a word. That night, my MIL dragged the rest of his junk out to the curb. Old shoes, some busted speakers, a ratty recliner that he dragged home from a yard sale years ago. All of it was piled high like a sad garage sale nobody wanted to visit. By morning, most of it was gone. Whatever was left got scooped up by the garbage truck. That was the last time I ever saw him. Life moved on after that. My Phil's health declined steadily over the next year, but he held on long enough to spend one last Christmas with us. My Mel made a huge dinner, and for the first time in ages, the house felt warm and happy. As for my husband, I heard rumors here and there. Someone claimed they saw him panhandling outside a gas station. Another person said he was living out of a car in a nearby town. None of it really mattered to me anymore. The last bit of news I heard came from his brother, who called my MIL about 6 months later. Apparently, my husband had tried reaching out to him, begging for a place to stay. His brother refused. By then, word had spread about everything he'd done, the cheating, the stealing, the way he treated his own family, and no one wanted anything to do with him. My MIL didn't celebrate or gloat when she heard. She just nodded, told his brother to be careful, and went back to making dinner like nothing had happened. That was her way. No screaming, no long speeches, just quiet moves that left my husband with nothing. In the end, my MIL didn't just get revenge, she erased him. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.